My name is Michael Thompson, and I need to tell you about what happened on Route 66 last summer. Sometimes at night, I still wake up in cold sweats, seeing those mirrors, those cursed mirrors that showed me things I never wanted to face. It started 3 months after Sarah died. The doctors called it a tragic accident, a fall down the stairs in the middle of the night. My kids, Tommy 11 and Lisa 8, were taking it hard. Every morning, I'd catch them sitting at the kitchen table, staring at their mom's empty chair. I thought a change of scenery might help us all heal. Maybe even help me escape the whispers in our small town. So I decided we'd move to California. Start fresh. That's how we ended up on Route 66 in the scorching Arizona heat. Our old station wagon chugging along like it was ready to give up any minute. We didn't have much money, but I knew we needed something more than motel rooms for the long journey ahead. That's when we saw the sign, Airstream trailer for sale, price negotiable. The elderly couple who owned it seemed nice enough, though something felt off about them. The old man's hand shook as he handed me the keys, and his wife kept crossing herself when she thought I wasn't looking. Just remember, she said, grabbing my arm with surprising strength, keep the mirrors covered at night. All of them. I nodded, thinking she was just another superstitious old lady. God, I wish I had listened. The price was too good to pass up, almost suspiciously good. The trailer was a beautiful silver bullet, all polished and gleaming in the desert sun. Tommy and Lisa fell in love with it right away. It's like a spaceship. Dad, Tommy said, running his hand along the smooth metal surface. Lisa just smiled, her first real smile since Sarah died. We spent that first afternoon cleaning it up, making it our own. There were mirrors everywhere, more than you'd expect in a trailer this size. Big ones, small ones, some in the oddest places. I remember thinking it was strange, but I was too excited about our fresh start to worry about it. That night, as we settled in at a camping spot just off the highway, the wind picked up. Sand rattled against the trailer's metal skin like tiny fingers trying to get in. I tucked the kids into their bunks, kissed them goodnight, and crashed onto my own bed. Exhausted, I was almost asleep when I heard Lisa scream, "Mommy, Mommy's in the mirror." If only I had believed her that first night. If only I had looked closer at those reflections. Maybe then things would have turned out differently. Maybe then I could have saved them both before the truth about Sarah's death came back to haunt us all. I ran to Lisa's bunk, trying to stay calm. She was sitting up, pointing at the small mirror mounted on the wall. Her hands were shaking. She was right there. "Daddy, Mommy was watching me. It was just a bad dream." "Sweetheart," I said, hugging her close. But Tommy was awake now too, staring at the same mirror. I saw her too. "Dad," he whispered. She looked different, sad. I covered the mirror with a shirt, telling them it would help them sleep better. But that was just the beginning. The next few days on Route 66 were strange. During the day, everything seemed normal. We'd drive through the desert, play card games, and stop at diners where the waitresses called us Han and gave the kids extra fries. But at night, things changed. It started with little things. Lisa's hairbrush would move from one counter to another. Tommy's baseball cap would end up in the sink when he swore he left it on his bed. And every morning, despite the heat, the mirrors would be clouded with what looked like frost around the edges. One night, I woke up to get a glass of water. The digital clock on the microwave showed 3:33 a.m. That's when I saw it, a big truck in my rear-view mirrors. Its headlights so bright they lit up our whole trailer. But when I looked out the window, there was nothing there, just empty roads stretching out behind us. The kids started getting quieter, spending more time whispering to each other. Sometimes I'd catch them staring into the mirrors, like they were waiting for something. When I asked what they were doing, they just say, talking to Mom. I should have listened harder, should have asked more questions, but it was easier to blame it on grief, on their imagination, on the long hours on the road. Then I found the journal, stuffed behind one of the cushions. It was old, the pages yellow and crinkly. The handwriting inside was messy, like someone had written it in a hurry. As I read the first page, my hands went cold. They come through the mirrors on full moon nights. They were familiar faces to lure you in, but they're not who they pretend to be. They're the shadow walkers, and they're hungry. I looked at the calendar on my phone. The full moon was tomorrow night. That's when the truck's headlights appeared in our mirrors again. 3:33 a.m. Right on time. But this time, I could have sworn I saw Sarah sitting in the passenger seat, staring right at me. I couldn't sleep after reading that first page, while the kids napped in the afternoon heat. I sat at the small dining table and read more of the journal. My hands were shaking as I turned each page. The journal belonged to a woman named Helen. She and her husband had owned the trailer before us. Her entries started normal enough, happy notes about retirement and traveling. Then things changed. June 15th. The mirrors are wrong. When I look in them at night, my reflection moves a second too late, like it's watching me. June 18th. David says I'm imagining things, but I know what I saw. Our grandson Billy visited us in the mirror last night, but Billy died 3 years ago. June 21st. The truck follows us now, always at 3:33. The driver never shows his face. I closed the journal when I heard Tommy and Lisa stirring. We needed gas anyway, and I saw a sign for a small station ahead. That's where we met John Blackhawk. He was an older Native American man, fixing a motorcycle outside the gas station. When he saw our trailer, he stopped working and just stared. I was filling up the tank when he walked over. That trailer, he said quietly. Where did you get it? I told him about the elderly couple. His face got serious. The mirrors in there, they're doorways. My people call them shadow paths. The shadow walkers use them to enter our world. I wanted to laugh it off, but I couldn't. Not after everything we'd seen. What do they want? I asked. They feed on guilt. He said, on secrets, on the darkness people carry inside them. He looked right at me then, like he could see straight through me. They show you what you need to see, even if you don't want to see it. I thought about Sarah, about that night, about the things I've been trying so hard to forget. How do we stop them? I asked. You can't stop them. He said, but you can face them. The truth is the only way out. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. Sage, he explained, burn it at sunset. It might buy you some time on the drive back to our campsite. I kept checking the mirrors. No truck. But something else was there now. A darkness at the edges, like shadows creeping in. That's when Lisa spoke up from the back seat. Daddy, she said in a small voice. Mommy told me what really happened that night. The sun was setting. In a few hours, it would be the full moon, and I knew, deep down, that tonight the shadows would come for us all. I couldn't look at Lisa after what she said. We parked the trailer at a campground just as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The desert got dark fast, and the wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the trailer's windows. I tried to burn the sage like John Blackhawk told me to, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The kids were quiet during dinner, barely touching their sandwiches. Tommy kept looking at the biggest mirror in the trailer, the one in the hallway. She's getting clearer. He whispered to Lisa. I can almost see her whole face now. Both of you, get ready for bed, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And don't look in any mirrors. Just go to sleep. That's when the power went out. I fumbled for my flashlight, but it wouldn't turn on. The trailer felt colder suddenly, much colder than a desert night should be. Then I heard it, the rumble of a truck engine. 3:33 a.m. Dad! Tommy's voice came from the back of the trailer. Dad! Come quick. Lisa's talking to Mom. I ran to the kids' bunks. But Lisa wasn't there. Just Tommy, pointing at the mirror, his face white with fear. In the mirror's surface, I could see Lisa standing in what looked like our old house. At the bottom of the stairs, Sarah was there too, reaching out to her. Lisa, I banged on the mirror. Lisa, get away from her. But when I touched the mirror's surface, it rippled like water. My daughter turned to look at me, tears running down her face. Tell him. Mommy, she said, tell him what he did. Then the mirror went dark, and Lisa was gone, just gone. Nothing but a small, bloody handprint left on the glass. Tommy started screaming. I grabbed him, held him close, tried to tell him everything would be okay, but we both knew I was lying. You killed her, didn't you? Dad! Tommy's voice was different now, older somehow. You killed Mom. The memories I'd pushed away for so long started flooding back. Sarah at the top of the stairs. Our fight. The push. It was just supposed to be a small push. I never meant to. Tommy, please. I started to say, but when I looked down, he wasn't in my arms anymore. He was standing in front of the hallway mirror, his back to me. They're not shadow walkers. Dad, he said, still not turning around. They're justice. Mom sent them. The truck's headlights flooded the trailer with blinding light. When I could see again, Tommy was gone too. Another bloody handprint on. Another mirror. I was alone in the trailer now, but not really alone. Every mirror showed a different scene from that night, playing over and over. Sarah's face, the stairs, the fall, the lies I told the police. And in every reflection, the truck driver watched, his face finally visible in the rearview mirror. He had my face. I fell to my knees in the trailer's narrow hallway, surrounded by mirrors showing me the truth I'd tried so hard to forget. Each reflection played that night like a movie I couldn't stop watching. Sarah had found out about the money I'd been stealing from our savings account, the gambling debts, the loans I'd taken in her name. She was going to tell everyone, going to leave with the kids. You're nothing but a liar, she had said that night. Standing at the top of the stairs, the kids deserve better. I remember how angry I got, how I climbed those stairs, my hands shaking. I told myself I just wanted to talk, to explain, but when I reached for her, I didn't grab her arm like I claimed to the police. I pushed her, hard. I watched her fall, heard the horrible sound when she hit the bottom, and then I called it an accident. The truck's engine was still running outside the trailer. Its headlights made shadows dance across the walls. But they weren't normal shadows anymore. They had faces, the faces of everyone I'd hurt. Sarah, Tommy, Lisa, even the elderly couple who'd sold me the trailer looked out from the darkness, their eyes full of sadness. We tried to warn you. The old woman's voice whispered from one of the mirrors. We knew what the trailer does to people like you, people with darkness in their hearts. I understood now. The trailer hadn't been cursed. It was a trap, a way to make people like me face what we'd done. The mirrors didn't show ghosts. They showed the truth. The truck driver, my reflection, stepped out of the biggest mirror. He walked towards me, but his feet didn't make any sound on the trailer's floor. Behind him, I could see my children, holding hands with Sarah. They were crying, but not from fear. They were crying for me. They're safe now. Sarah's voice came from every mirror at once. They know the truth, but you have a choice to make. Michael, the truck driver, held out his hand, and it was a small mirror. No bigger than my palm. Face what you did. Sarah said, really face it, or live with these reflections forever. I looked into the small mirror. My face stared back. But it was different now. Older, sadder. Behind my reflection, I could see a way out, a way to make things right. But the price would be high, very high. My name is William Hayes, but everyone calls me Will. I'm 45 years old, and after everything I saw in Vietnam, I thought nothing could scare me anymore. I was wrong, dead wrong. I bought this RV last week, a beaten-up 1970 Winnebago that smells like old coffee and pine air fresheners. It's not much, but it's mine, and it's perfect for what I need. Getting away from people. The nightmares have been getting worse lately. My therapist says I need time to process, whatever that means. So here I am, driving up the winding road to Redwood National Park, looking for some peace and quiet. The trees here are giants. They make me feel small in a way that's somehow comforting. As I follow the narrow road deeper into the forest, the sunlight barely reaches through the thick canopy above. It's like driving through green twilight. Even though it's only 2 p.m., the sign for Campground 23 appears suddenly, old and half hidden behind a curtain of moss. Something about it seems off, but I can't put my finger on what. Maybe it's how the metal is too rusty for a national park sign, or how the numbers look hand-painted instead of official. But I'm tired from driving, and this is the first campground I've seen in miles. I pull into the empty parking area. No other campers. No rangers. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels like it's listening to you. I tell myself this is exactly what I wanted, solitude. But as I step out of the RV, the quiet hits me like a physical thing. No birds. No squirrels. Not even the sound of wind in the massive trees above. While setting up camp, I find something in one of the RV storage compartments, a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings. They're fragile, crumbling at the edges. My hands shake a little as I read the headlines. 3 more vanish from Redwood Campground. Search parties find no trace of missing family. Mysterious disappearances continue to baffle authorities, all from 1958. All about the same area. I should leave. Every instinct, every lesson I learned in Nam is screaming at me to get back in the RV and drive. But there's something else too, a heaviness in my limbs, a fog in my brain that makes everything feel slow and dreamy. I tell myself I'm just tired. I'll look at the clippings more carefully in the morning. Right now, I just need to sleep. As I drift off in the RV's small bed, I could swear I hear children laughing somewhere in the woods. But that's impossible. I'm alone here. Aren't I? I wake up to thunder. At least. That's what I think it is until I open my eyes and see clear skies through the RV window. The sound comes again, a deep boom that seems to come from the ground itself, like artillery fire. A part of my brain whispers. But I push that thought away hard. I need coffee, need to think straight, while the water heats up on my little camping stove. I decide to check in at the ranger station. There's a registration book in a wooden box near my campsite. The kind where you're supposed to sign in. Maybe it'll tell me if anyone else is around. The book is old, really old. The cover is warped from years of rain. Even though it's protected by the box, when I open it, the pages crackle like dead leaves. And that's when I see it, something that makes my coffee-hungry brain stutter to a stop. Every single entry shows the same date, July 23rd, 1958, different names, different handwriting, but always that same date. Page after page after page. Some entries stop mid-sentence. Like the person writing was suddenly pulled away. My hands are shaking as I turn to the last page. And there, in fresh ink that looks barely dry, is today's date. No name written yet. I slam the book shut. This is crazy. I'm just tired. Or maybe this is some kind of joke for tourists. But then I hear it. Children's laughter again. Closer this time. Two little girls stand at the edge of my campsite. They're twins. Maybe 9 or 10 years old. Wearing matching blue dresses that look old-fashioned. They're picking mushrooms, dropping them into small wicker baskets. Everything about them seems wrong. Their clothes, the way they move too smoothly, how they don't make any sound when they walk. Hey, I call out, more sharply than I mean to. Where are your parents? They look up at exactly the same time, with exactly the same movement. Their faces are too pale, like they've never seen sunlight. One of them smiles. It's not a kid smile. They're waiting. One girl says, "In the trees," says the other. Then they turn and walk into the forest. I run after them. They were right there, just a few feet away, but by the time I reach the spot where they were standing, there's nothing, just a circle of mushrooms growing in the dirt. White, caps gleaming like teeth. Back in the RV, I try to calm down. I flip on the radio, hoping for some news, some weather, anything normal. Static crackles. Then music starts playing. It's an old song, something from the 50s about love and dancing. I try to change the station, but the dial won't move. Try to turn it off, but the switch doesn't work. The music plays on, tinny and distant, like it's coming from very far away or long ago. That's when I notice something dark seeping down the inside of my window. It looks like sap, but it's too red, too thick, and it's flowing upward. The red liquid keeps flowing up the window. My hands start shaking like they used to after missions in Nam. I close my eyes, trying to do the breathing exercises my therapist taught me. In, hold, out, in, hold, out. But when I open my eyes, it's worse. The trees are bleeding. Dark red sap oozes from their bark. But it's not just coming out, it's moving, flowing in ways sap shouldn't move. It reminds me of the way blood pumped from wounds in the jungle. And suddenly, I'm not sure what's real anymore. The forest around me looks like Vietnam 1 second, then back to California the next. The radio keeps playing that old music, but now it sounds like screams. I grab my flashlight and jacket. Need to get out of here. Find a ranger. Find anyone. But as soon as I step outside, I know something's wrong with the ground. It feels soft, like walking on something that's trying to give way under my feet. The beam of my flashlight catches something white in the dirt near my campfire. At first, I think it's more mushrooms. But mushrooms don't have that shape. Mushrooms don't look like fingers. My hands remember digging before my brain does. Years of military training kick in, and I'm on my knees, scraping at the earth. It comes away too easily, like it's been dug up before. The smell hits me, old decay and wet earth, just like the mass graves we found in No. Focus. This is California. This is now. But what I'm uncovering is real. Bones. Lots of them. Some still have scraps of cloth clinging to them. Pieces of old-fashioned dresses. Camping clothes from another time. And scattered among them, small wicker baskets, rotted and filled with mushrooms. The music from the RV suddenly gets louder. I spin around, and through the window I see them, the twins, sitting in my RV. They're facing away from me, but their heads are turned completely backward, necks twisted too far to be possible. They smile those wrong smiles. They're all here. One says, "Everyone who signed the book." Says the other, "Your page is still empty." But not for long. The ground under my feet starts to sink. The old song on the radio changes to something else. The sound of dirt falling on a coffin lid. Over and over and over I run. My boots sink into the soft ground with every step. But I run anyway. The trees all look the same in the dark. Their bleeding trunks, glowing red in my flashlight beam. The radio music follows me somehow, getting louder and softer like waves, mixing with the sound of children laughing. Then I see lights through the trees, real lights. Flashlights bouncing through the forest. My heart jumps. Help! Finally! Help! Here! I shout. Over here! 3 park rangers appear out of the darkness. They look solid, real, normal, the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. But when they spot me, their faces change. They look scared, not of me, but for me. "Sir, you need to come with us right now," the oldest ranger says. His name tag reads Martinez. "You're not supposed to be here. This isn't a real campground anymore." "What do you mean?" My voice sounds strange in my ears, like it's coming from far away. The female ranger steps forward. Campground 23 was closed in 1958. After the murders, the whole campground was moved 2 miles north. The third ranger adds, "This is the old site, the cursed site." Martinez shines his light on a tree near us. There's a faded sign nailed to it, half covered in moss. "Danger, no camping, by order of U.S. Forestry Service." In the summer of '58, Martinez says quietly, "A man named Samuel Whitmore camped here with his twin daughters. He was sick in the head, made them help him trap other campers. Killed 15 people before they caught him. The girls, too. They'd eaten poison mushrooms their father gave them." The music from my RV is getting louder. The rangers' flashlights start to flicker. The bodies. I whisper, "They're still here, under the ground." "Sir," the female ranger says urgently, "where exactly is your RV parked?" I point back the way I came, but I already know what she's going to say. I can feel it in my bones. That's where they found most of the bodies. Martinez says, "In a big pit." Right where? The ground opens up beneath my feet. The last thing I hear is the twins singing along with the radio, their voices getting closer and closer as I sink into the earth. The last thing I see is mushrooms growing up through the bones around me, white caps glowing like small, smiling faces. They found me 3 days later, sitting in my RV. The rangers say my hair had turned completely white, and I was surrounded by a perfect circle of mushrooms growing through the RV's floor. They say I haven't spoken a word since, but that's not true. I speak to the twins sometimes. When the music plays, they visit every night, collecting their mushrooms, waiting for the next person to sign the registry book. After all, there's still so many empty pages to fill. My name is Marcus Walker, and I've spent the last 30 years taking pictures of wildlife, from lions in Africa to polar bears in Alaska. I've captured them all through my lens. But nothing in my life as a photographer prepared me for what happened in the Okefenokee Swamp that summer. I wish I'd never taken my son Danny there. I wish I'd listened to the warnings. But I guess when you're desperate to fix things with your teenage kid, you don't always make the best choices. It was the hottest summer Georgia had seen in 50 years, and the air felt like hot soup. Danny sat next to me in our rented RV, playing on his phone and ignoring me like he had been since the divorce 2 years ago. He didn't want to be here. That much was clear from his eye rolls and heavy sighs every time I tried to start a conversation. This is going to be great, I said, trying to sound excited as we bumped down the dirt road toward our camping spot. The swamp has some of the most amazing wildlife you'll ever see. Whatever, Danny mumbled, not looking up from his phone. The sun was setting when we finally parked the RV in a small clearing. The trees around us were draped with Spanish moss that hung like gray curtains. And somewhere in the distance, a bird made a sound like someone crying. I tried not to think about how isolated we were. The ranger station was 5 miles back, and we hadn't seen another person for hours. While setting up my camera equipment, I found something strange, an old leather-bound book half buried in the mud. It was a logbook, its pages yellow and wrinkled with age. As I flipped through it, my hands started to shake. Page after page described mysterious lights in the swamp and people who had gone missing while investigating them. The last entry was from 1991, and it simply said, "They're hungry again." I almost dropped the book when Danny suddenly called out, "Dad, look at that." I turned around and saw what he was pointing at. Out in the darkness of the swamp, floating above the black water, were lights. They weren't like anything I'd ever seen before, not flashlights or boat lights or even fireflies. They were an eerie bluish green, and they seemed to pulse like a heartbeat for the first time in years. Danny wasn't looking at his phone. He was staring at the lights with a strange expression on his face. And when he spoke, his voice sounded different somehow, almost like he was in a trance. "They're beautiful," he whispered. "They're calling us." A chill ran down my spine despite the heat. In that moment, as the lights danced across the water and my son's face glowed with their reflection, I had a terrible feeling that bringing him here had been a huge mistake. I just didn't know how huge yet. That was the first night in the swamp. If I'd known what was coming, the sleepwalking, the voices, the graves we'd discover, and the choice I'd have to make to save my son, I would have turned that RV around right then and never looked back. But by the time the sun set the next day, it would already be too late for us to leave. The swamp had us now, and it was hungry for more than just pictures. I woke up at 3 a.m. to find Danny's bed empty. My heart started racing as I jumped up and grabbed my flashlight. The RV door was wide open, letting in the hot, sticky night air. Outside, the moon was so bright it made the Spanish moss look like ghost fingers reaching down from the trees. "Danny," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady even though I was scared to death. "Danny, where are you?" That's when I saw him. He was standing knee-deep in the swamp water, completely still, facing those lights again. They were brighter tonight, pulsing like 100 underwater heartbeats. Danny's arms hung limp at his sides, and he was whispering something I couldn't hear. I splashed through the water to reach him, not caring about the snakes or alligators that might be around. When I grabbed his shoulder, his skin was ice cold despite the heat. "Danny, wake up." I shook him gently, then harder when he didn't respond. Finally, his eyes fluttered open. He looked confused, like someone waking up from a deep dream. "Dad, why am I wet?" "You were sleepwalking," I said, leading him back to shore. "Come on, let's get you inside." But before we could reach the RV, a woman's voice called out from the darkness, "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, pointing my flashlight toward the voice. An old woman stood at the edge of the trees. She wore a simple dress and had white hair tied back with a colorful scarf. She didn't look scary, but something about the way she looked at Danny made my skin crawl. "I'm Marie," she said, walking closer. "I live just beyond those trees. When I saw your lights last night, I knew I had to come warn you." She pointed at the ground near our RV. "Do you know what you're parked on top of?" I shook my head. "Graves," she said simply. "Very old ones. slave graves, and they don't like being disturbed. Danny moved closer to me, shivering despite the warm air. The lights, he said suddenly. I can hear them talking when they shine. They're so angry. Marie nodded like this made perfect sense. They were people once, she said. People who died here terrible deaths. Their spirits are trapped, and they're looking for someone to help them. She looked straight at Danny. Someone young and open to their voices. I wanted to tell her she was crazy, that ghosts weren't real. But I couldn't forget how I'd found Danny in the water, or the way he'd been whispering to nothing. And now that I looked more carefully at the ground around our RV, I could see small depressions in the earth, too regular to be natural. You need to leave, Marie said, before they choose him completely. But when we tried to start the RV that night, the engine wouldn't turn over. We were stuck here, right on top of those graves. And as I lay in bed listening to Danny toss and turn in his sleep, I heard voices outside, dozens of them, all whispering at once. They weren't just lights anymore. They were something much worse. And they wanted my son. The next morning, Danny wasn't himself anymore. At breakfast, he sat staring at his cereal, moving the spoon in slow circles without eating. His face looked different, somehow older, with dark shadows under his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was deeper than usual. They died in chains, he said, still stirring his cereal. They worked them to death right here, and then buried them where nobody would look. A chill ran through me. Danny, stop it. This isn't funny. He looked up at me then, and I almost fell out of my chair. His eyes were different, darker, like deep pools of swamp water. My name isn't Danny, he said in a voice that wasn't his. I'm Thomas. They killed me in 1859. I grabbed his shoulders. Danny, snap out of it. He blinked a few times, and suddenly he was my son again, looking scared and confused. Dad, what's happening to me? Before I could answer, we heard screaming from somewhere in the swamp. We ran outside and saw police lights flashing through the trees. A park ranger's boat was pulled up to the shore near our camping spot, and 2 officers were taking pictures of something in the water. I told Danny to stay in the RV while I went to check it out. As I got closer, I saw what they were photographing. Strange symbols carved into a cypress tree, and below them, floating in the dark water. I won't describe what I saw. Let's just say it was the first victim. This is the 3rd one this month. One officer said to the other, always with these same symbols, like some kind of ritual. I hurried back to the RV, my hands shaking, but Danny wasn't there. I found him kneeling in the dirt behind our campsite, digging with his bare hands. Danny, what are you doing? Finding proof, he said. But it wasn't his voice again. This time it was a woman's voice coming from my son's mouth. They need to know what happened here. The hole he dug was getting deeper, and I could see something white beginning to show through the dark soil. Bones. Human bones. That's when Marie appeared again, moving quietly through the trees like a shadow. It's starting, she said. The spirits are using him to tell their story. Each one that speaks through him makes him a little less himself. Soon, there won't be any Danny left, just angry ghosts looking for revenge. How do I stop it? I begged her. You can't stop it, she said. You can only choose. Let the truth come out and lose your son, or keep the secret and maybe save him. But hurry, when the blood moon rises tomorrow night. They'll take him completely. I looked at Danny, still digging with someone else's determination in his eyes. In the distance, those lights were starting to appear again. Even in daylight, they were getting stronger, hungrier, and I had less than 24 hours to make an impossible choice. As night fell, The voices inside Danny got stronger. He would switch between the mid-sentence now, his face changing with each new voice. One minute he was Thomas, the slave who died in chains. Then Sarah, who lost her children to fever. Then William, who tried to help others escape. Each voice told pieces of a terrible story about what happened in this swamp. I found more proof as I searched through old town records on my phone. In 1859, over 50 slaves disappeared from the plantation that used to be here. The owner claimed they'd run away, but the spirits speaking through Danny told a different story. They'd been worked to death draining the swamp, then buried in unmarked graves to hide the evidence. While I was reading this, I heard another scream from the swamp. The second victim had been found, with the same strange symbols carved nearby. The police were everywhere now, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like angry fireflies. It's the spirits. Marie told me when she appeared again, they're using these deaths to send a message. Each victim is connected to the families that covered up the massacre. The spirits want justice. I looked at my son, who was scratching symbols into the RV's wall with his fingernails. They were the same symbols found at the murder scenes. His fingers were bleeding, but he kept scratching. How do I save him? I asked Marie. There's a ritual, she said. It might free him from their hold, but it has to be done at midnight during the blood moon. That's tomorrow night. And it comes with a price. What price? The truth stays buried. The spirits remain trapped. Justice dies with their story. I watched Danny as different voices argued through him, his face changing like a twisted slideshow. Some begged for help. Others screamed for revenge. Somewhere in there, my son was drowning in their pain. A police officer approached our RV, shining his flashlight at the symbols Danny had scratched. Sir, we'd like to ask you and your son some questions. I could tell him everything. Show him the bones Danny had found. Let the spirits have their justice through my son's voice. The truth would finally come out after more than 150 years. But would there be any of my son left when it was over? The blood moon would rise tomorrow night. I had until then to decide justice for the dead or salvation for my son. And as Danny spoke with another voice that wasn't his own, I realized I was running out of time to save him. Dad, he said in his own voice for just a moment, his eyes clearing briefly. I'm scared. I can't find my way back. The lights in the swamp were getting closer, pulsing like hungry hearts. They were coming to claim what they believed was theirs. The blood moon rose red and angry over the swamp. Danny hadn't spoken in his own voice for hours now. He sat in the middle of our campsite, surrounded by symbols he'd drawn in the dirt. The spirits took turns using his voice to tell their stories, each one more horrible than the last. The lights from the swamp had grown so bright, they lit up everything in a sickly blue-green glow. Marie arrived just before midnight with a small bag of things for the ritual. Are you sure about this? She asked me. Once it's done, their stories die forever. The truth stays buried. I looked at my son, or what was left of him. His eyes were completely black now, and when he spoke, it was with 10 voices at once. The spirits were fighting over him like hungry dogs with a bone. I'm sure. I said, he's my son. That's when the police lights appeared through the trees again. They'd found something in the water, more bones, more bodies. They were getting closer to the truth. I could end it all right now. Let Danny tell them everything. Justice would finally come for these tortured souls. But I remember what Danny had said in his own voice. One of the last times I'd heard it. Dad, I'm scared. I can't find my way back. Marie began the ritual. She sprinkled something in a circle around Danny and started speaking words I didn't understand. The swamp lights pulsed angry and red, matching the color of the moon above. Stop! The spirits screamed through Danny's mouth. We deserve justice. We deserve to be remembered. I'll remember you. I promised them, I'll tell your story, but not through my son. I stepped into the circle with Danny. This wasn't part of the ritual. Marie tried to pull me back. But I knew what I had to do. I hugged my son tight as the spirits raged around us. I'm here. Danny, I whispered, follow my voice. Come back to me. The light swirled around us like a tornado. I felt cold hands pulling at me, heard voices screaming in my ears. But I didn't let go. Remember when you were little? I said to Danny, how we used to go camping. Just us. Remember the stories we'd tell? Come back to those memories. Come back to me, slowly. I felt him getting warmer in my arms. The voices got quieter. The lights began to fade. And then, like waking from a nightmare, Danny hugged me back. Dad, he said in his own voice. Just his voice. No others. The blood moon disappeared behind clouds. The lights sank back into the swamp. Marie's ritual had worked, but not just because of her magic. Danny had found his way back because I'd given him a path to follow. Love, it turned out, was stronger than vengeance. We left the swamp that night. I kept my promise. I wrote down every story the spirits had told, every name they'd shared. The truth wouldn't die with them, but it would be told my way. Not theirs. Danny doesn't remember much about what happened. Sometimes in his sleep, he still whispers in voices that aren't his own. And sometimes, when I look at photos from that night, I see lights in the background that shouldn't be there. But he's alive. He's himself. And if there's one thing I learned in that swamp, it's that being a father means making impossible choices. I chose my son. I'll always choose my son. The dead have their stories, but the living have their own stories too. And those are the ones I need to protect. My name is Linda Morrison, and I'm about to tell you a story that still gives me nightmares. Even now, years later, the sound of an RV engine makes my hands shake. It all started with a phone call about my brother Tom's will. I was washing dishes when the call came. The water was too hot, but I barely noticed. My mind was somewhere else, thinking about Kevin's college applications and Amy's upcoming driving test. Normal mom stuff, things that seem so silly now. Mrs. Morrison, the lawyer's voice crackled through the phone. I'm calling about your brother's estate. Tom. My stomach twisted at the mention of him. We hadn't spoken in years. Not since that huge fight about Dad's old business. And now he was gone. His truck found wrapped around a guardrail on some mountain road in West Virginia. He left you something. The lawyer continued. The RV. He was very specific about it going to you and your family. I almost dropped the phone. The RV? That massive beast Tom bought last year? I remembered him bragging about it on Facebook, his retirement dream. He called it. What was I supposed to do with an RV? Jack, my husband, was excited when I told him. Think about it. Honey, we could take that family road trip we've been talking about. Follow the autumn colors down the Appalachian Mountains. I should have said no. Should have sold that RV the minute we got it. But Jack had that look in his eyes. The one he gets when he's really passionate about something. And the kids, well, Kevin and Amy were actually agreeing on something for once. Both begging to go. It'll be an adventure. Jack said, squeezing my hand, a chance for us all to be together before Kevin heads off to college. If only I'd known what kind of adventure we were really in for. We picked up the RV on a Tuesday. It was bigger than I expected. Gleaming white against the gray October sky, like a whale beached on asphalt. The inside smelled like pine air freshener and something else. Something metallic that reminded me of pennies. Kevin found the CB radio right away. fiddling with knobs and making static burst through the cabin. Cool. It's like in those old trucker movies. Amy rolled her eyes at her brother, but I caught her smiling. She was 16 and trying so hard to be grown up. But sometimes that little kid excitement still shone through. That first night, as we packed for the trip, the temperature dropped suddenly. The weather app on my phone said it was minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit, which seemed impossible for October. I checked 3 different apps, but they all said the same thing. I remember standing in our driveway, staring at that RV in the darkness. Maybe it was just shadows playing tricks, but I could have sworn I saw something move behind one of the windows. And for a second, just a split second, I thought I heard Tom's laugh carried on the wind. Just nerves. I told myself, hurrying back inside, it's just nerves about the trip, but deep down, in that part of your gut that knows things before your brain catches up, I already felt it. Something was wrong with that RV. Something was wrong with this whole situation. I just didn't know how wrong. Not yet. We left early the next morning, just as the sun was coming up. The roads were empty, and fog hung low over the trees like a blanket. Jack was behind the wheel, humming to himself as he drove. He loved this kind of thing, being in charge, leading his family on an adventure. I watched his hands on the steering wheel, steady and sure, and tried to push down my worries. Kevin had claimed the back bedroom with all his electronics. I could hear him talking to the CB radio, trying to get someone to answer. Amy sat at the small dining table, her headphones in, sketching in her notebook. Everything seemed so normal, too normal. The first weird thing happened when we stopped at a diner for lunch. It was one of those old places you find on mountain roads, with a neon sign that flickered and booze covered in cracked red vinyl. The waitress was filling our coffee cups when she saw our RV through the window. "That's Tom Morrison's rig." "Ain't it?" she asked, her hand frozen mid-pour. Coffee dripped onto the table, but she didn't seem to notice. Jack nodded. Proud. Was his. We inherited it. The diner got quiet. Like, really quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle. Every face turned toward us, and I saw something in their eyes. Fear? Pity? I couldn't tell. But it made my stomach turn. "You folks ain't taking it up Dead Man's Curve. Are you?" An old man at the counter spoke up, his voice scratchy. "That's our route." Jack said, "Following the mountain parkway down to Dash, don't." The waitress cut him off. Coffee was still dripping from her pot. "Take the interstate instead. Safer that way." I wanted to ask why, but Amy suddenly gasped, "Mom, I'm freezing." She was shivering, her lips looking almost blue. I touched her arm. It was ice cold. Even though the diner was warm and stuffy, the temperature on, my phone read minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit again, just like last night, back in the RV. We tried to laugh it off. Mountain folks and their superstitions. Jack said, but his smile looked forced. Amy's shivering had stopped as suddenly as it started, and Kevin was oddly quiet, staring at the CB radio. "Dad," he said finally, "I think something's wrong with this radio. I keep hearing conversations, but they sound old. Like, really old." "What do you mean?" "Honey," I asked, moving closer. Kevin turned up the volume. Through the static, I could make out voices. "Watch that curve coming up. Too fast. Can't make it. No. Please." And oh, dash, the radio went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. That was from 1962. Kevin whispered, "I heard them say the date before, right before they..." He didn't finish his sentence. He didn't have to. We all knew what he meant. The RV's engine rumbled beneath us as we climbed higher into the mountains. Somehow, its sound had changed. It didn't seem like a machine anymore. It sounded like breathing, like someone else was in there with us, taking every turn, watching our every move. The sun was setting now, painting the mountains in orange and red. Beautiful, but somehow threatening, like the colors were too bright, too angry. Jack hadn't spoken for the last hour, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Something about the way he gripped the steering wheel made me nervous. His knuckles were white, and there was sweat on his forehead despite the cold. Maybe we should stop for the night, I suggested quietly. There's a campground sign coming up. No, Jack's voice sounded strange, deeper than usual. We need to keep going. Tom always kept going. I froze. Jack had never called my brother Tom before. He'd always said your brother. Before I could say anything, Amy screamed from the back. I ran to her, finding her curled up in her seat, shaking violently. Her skin was ice cold again. Her lips blue. This time, the shivering didn't stop. The heater's on full blast. Kevin said, his voice shaking. He was right. I could feel hot air blowing from the vents. But Amy just got colder. We need to get her to a hospital, I said, wrapping her in blankets. I pulled out my phone to search for the nearest emergency room, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. Jack, we have to turn around. He didn't answer. The RV sped up instead, taking the mountain curves faster than before. I stumbled to the front, grabbing his shoulder. Jack, please. When he looked at me, his eyes were different. They looked just like Tom's. Mom, Kevin called out. The radio's doing it again, through the static. A woman's voice came through, crying. Wasn't an accident. He made it happen. Dead Man's Curve. That's when I saw it. A small box tucked under the driver's seat. Inside were newspaper clippings about accidents on this road, all from 1962, and a letter, written in Tom's messy handwriting. Linda, if you're reading this, I'm already dead, but I'm not gone. This RV is special. It helps me finish what I started. Dad's death wasn't an accident. Now everyone will know the truth, starting with your family. The temperature on my phone flashed again, minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit. And Jack started laughing, but it wasn't his laugh anymore. It was Tom's. I ran back to Amy and Kevin, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Amy was still shivering under her blankets, and Kevin looked terrified. Mom, Kevin whispered, what's happening to Dad? Before I could answer, the RV swerved sharply. We all grabbed onto something to keep from falling, through the windshield. I could see we were heading straight for the most dangerous part of the road, Dead Man's Curve. Kids, listen to me, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to get your father away from those controls. Whatever's happening, that's not Dad anymore. The truth hit me like a punch to the stomach. Tom wasn't just haunting the RV. He was using it for revenge. All those accidents in 1962, they weren't accidents at all. And Dad's death, Tom blamed me for not believing him back then. Kevin pointed at the CB radio, his hand shaking. More voices coming through. This time, we all heard it clearly. A man's voice from 1962. Your brother tampered with the brakes, made it look like an accident. Dead Man's Curve claims another victim. It was murder. Jack's voice, now sounding exactly like Tom, boomed from the front. Our father was murdered. Linda, and you didn't believe me. Amy suddenly sat up, her eyes wide. Uncle Tom, she whispered, her breath coming out in frozen puffs despite the heater running full blast. The RV picked up speed. Trees whipped past the windows faster and faster. The steering wheel turned by itself under Jack's rigid hands. His eyes now completely blank. I had to do something, fighting to stay on my feet as the RV swayed. I made my way to the front. Jack, or Tom, or whatever he had become, didn't even look at me. Tom, I said, I'm sorry I didn't believe you, but these are my children, your niece and nephew. Please. For a moment, just a moment, I saw Jack's real eyes return. He looked at me, terrified. Linda, help. But then Tom was back. The RV accelerated harder, engine screaming through the windshield. I could see the curve coming up, a sharp bend with nothing but air and jagged rocks beyond the guardrail. Kevin grabbed Amy, dragging her toward the RV's emergency exit despite her weakness. Smart boy. I lunged for the steering wheel, fighting against Jack's unnaturally strong grip. You'll finally understand. Tom's voice came from Jack's mouth. You'll see what it feels like to lose everything. The guardrail was getting closer. Amy screamed. Kevin reached for the emergency exit handle. And that's when I saw it. The small cross hanging from the rearview mirror. The one Mom gave Tom before he died. The one he'd kissed right before he drove Dad off the same curve. I grabbed it, ripping it free. Is this what you want? Tom? The proof. The RV swerved again. We were almost at the curve. Time was running out. Look at it. Tom, I held up the cross, my hand shaking. Your proof was here all along. The cross, it has blood on it. Dad's blood. I see it now. The RV slowed just a little. Jack's face, Tom's face, turned toward me. The cross swung in my grip. And yes, there was tiny dark stains on the back that I'd never noticed before. All these years, I said, my voice breaking. You kept it as proof, and now I understand. You were right about Dad's death. But please, Tom, don't make more children lose their father. Don't make me lose my husband. Amy's weak voice came from behind me. Uncle Tom, I'm so cold. The RV was still heading for the curve, but slower now, through the windshield. I could see the exact spot where the old guardrail had been replaced, where Tom's truck had gone over, where Dad had died years before. Kevin was holding Amy up, both of them pressed against the back door. My brave kids, trying to survive, just like I had tried to survive after Dad died. After Tom started telling those crazy stories about murder. I'm sorry. I whispered, I'm sorry I didn't listen. The RV shuddered. The temperature on my phone started climbing up from minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit. Jack's face changed, the hardness melting away. Confusion replacing anger. But we were still moving, still heading for the curve. Linda, Jack's real voice now. Scared and weak. I can't stop it. The brakes, they're not working. Of course, just like Dad's car, just like Tom's truck. History repeating itself on Dead Man's Curve. I did the only thing I could think of. I hugged Jack from behind, squeezing him tight, and screamed, Tom, let us live to tell your truth. The RV hit the curve. For a moment, we were all floating. The world outside the windows tilted. I heard Amy scream. Felt Kevin grab my arm. Jack's hand found mine. Then everything happened at once. The RV twisted sharply. Tires screaming. Metal groaned. We spun. Once. Twice. And stopped. Right at the edge of the cliff. The engine died. The terrible cold disappeared. Jack slumped in his seat. Then sat up, himself again. Completely himself. In the sudden quiet. The CB radio crackled one last time. Tom's voice. But gentle now. Like I remembered from when we were kids. I just wanted someone to know the truth. I know now, I said softly, and I'll make sure everyone else knows too. We found the proof in that box under the seat, not just the newspaper clippings, but Dad's old diary, the truth about the family business, the money he'd stolen, the people he'd hurt, and Tom's own notes, explaining everything. We never drove that RV again. Didn't need to. Tom's story finally got told. His name cleared. But sometimes, on cold nights, my phone's temperature reading will flash briefly to minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit, just for a second, just long enough to remind me that every family has its ghosts, its curves in the road. The trick is learning when to face them and when to let them rest. Kevin still swears he hears voices on CB radios. Amy doesn't get cold anymore, but she always carries a blanket, just in case. Jack doesn't remember much about that night, but he holds my hand a little tighter when we drive mountain roads. And me? I keep Tom's cross on my bedside table. Not as proof anymore. We have plenty of that. I keep it to remember that sometimes the scariest ghosts aren't the ones that try to hurt us. They're the ones that just want to be heard. My name is Frank Miller, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to die out here in the Nevada desert. Well, maybe die isn't the right word, since I'm beginning to think I might already be dead. But let me start from the beginning. Back when this was just supposed to be another sales trip. I've been a traveling salesman for 15 years, selling vacuum cleaners door to door. Not the most glamorous job, but it lets me keep moving. And that's what I need, you see. There are some things in my past that I'd rather leave behind, some mistakes that are easier to outrun than face. It was just after sunset when things started getting weird. The desert sky had turned that deep purple color it gets right before true dark, and my old RV was chugging along Highway 95. I hadn't seen another car for hours, which wasn't too strange out here in the middle of nowhere. The radio had gone static about an hour back, so it was just me and the hum of tires on asphalt. That's when I saw him, the hitchhiker. He was standing right where the road crossed an old chain-link fence with faded warning signs about some government testing site. I don't usually pick up hitchhikers, but something made me stop. Maybe it was the loneliness of the road. Or maybe, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. He got in without saying thanks. This thin man in a dusty black suit. The weird thing was, he didn't seem hot or tired. Even though we were in the middle of the desert, his face was pale, almost gray in the dashboard lights. Long way to Carson City, he said. Before I'd even mentioned where I was headed, I felt my hands grip the steering wheel tighter. How'd you know I was going to Carson City? He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind that makes your stomach turn cold. Oh, Frank, he said. I know all about you, about the accident in '53, about little Tommy Jenkins. My blood went ice cold. Nobody knew about Tommy Jenkins. I'd spent 20 years making sure of that. I glanced at the hitchhiker, but he was staring straight ahead, that horrible smile still on his face. That's when I noticed the odometer. The numbers were running backwards, spinning like a clock rewinding. And in the rearview mirror, I could swear my hair was getting grayer by the minute. The hitchhiker turned to me, his eyes now completely black, like empty holes in his face. Welcome to the Devil's Highway. Frank, you're going to be here a long time. I slammed on the brakes, but the RV kept moving forward, even as the speedometer dropped to zero. Outside! The desert night seemed to get darker, if that was even possible, and somewhere in the distance, I heard what sounded like a child crying. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of the longest night of my life, or maybe my death. I'm still not sure which I tried to open the door and jump out, but my hands shook so badly I couldn't work the handle. The hitchhiker just sat there, watching me with those black eyes, not moving a muscle. "Keep driving." "Frank," he said softly, "you can't stop now. None of us can." My throat felt dry as sandpaper. "What do you mean?" "Us." He pointed to something ahead on the road, in the RV's headlights. I saw another vehicle, an exact copy of my RV. It was driving just ahead of us, moving at the same speed. Through its back window, I could see someone who looked just like me at the wheel. I rubbed my eyes hard, hoping it was just my tired mind playing tricks. But when I looked again, there were now 3 RVs ahead of us, each with another me inside. The only difference was that each me looked older than the last. The furthest one ahead had white hair and skin that looked like old paper. The radio suddenly crackled to life. But instead of music, I heard voices. They were talking about nuclear waste transport routes and something called Project Sidewinder. The date they mentioned was May 15th, 1953, exactly 20 years before today. That's when I noticed the signs we were passing. They were old and bullet-riddled, but I could still read them. Danger, nuclear test site, and trespassing. Some had radiation symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. "Where are we really?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You know where." The hitchhiker replied, "You've been here before. We all have. Up ahead." I saw lights. They looked like a small town, and my heart jumped with hope. Maybe there would be people there. Real people who could help me make sense of all this. I pressed the gas pedal harder, desperate to reach those lights. The town looked normal at first. A gas station, a diner, a few houses with their porch lights on. But something was wrong. The cars parked on the street were all from the 1950s, covered in 2 decades of dust. And through the diner's windows, I could see people sitting at tables, completely still, like mannequins. I pulled up to the gas station, and that's when I saw my reflection in the window. My hair had gone completely gray, and my face was lined with wrinkles that hadn't been there hours ago. But worse than that was what I saw behind me in the reflection. Dozens of identical RVs stretching back into the desert darkness, each one carrying another version of me. The hitchhiker's smile grew wider. "Ready to remember now, Frank, ready to remember what really happened that night in 53. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel, because I was starting to remember. And the truth was worse than anything I could have imagined. I got out of the RV on shaky legs. The night air was cold, much colder than it should be in the Nevada desert. The hitchhiker followed me, his shoes making no sound on the cracked pavement. "Take a look inside the diner." "Frank," he said, "I think you'll find it familiar." I walked to the diner's window, my feet feeling heavier with each step. The people inside hadn't moved. They sat frozen in their seats, coffee cups halfway to their lips, forks suspended over plates of food that had turned to dust. Their skin was gray and papery, like old photographs left in the sun. But what made my heart stop was the calendar on the wall. May 15th, 1953. The same day I'd been trying not to think about for 20 years. I turned away, but the hitchhiker was right there. "Remember the truck, Frank? The one carrying the nuclear waste? Remember how you were running late that day, trying to make up time on this very road?" "Stop," I whispered, but the memories were flooding back now. "Remember little Tommy Jenkins? He was in the car with his mother when you swerved into the wrong lane. You survived the crash." "Frank, they didn't. Neither did the truck driver, or anyone in this town when the waste spilled." My legs gave out, and I sat hard on the curb. The concrete felt ice cold through my pants. That's not true, I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were a lie. I heard a noise from my RV and looked up. The walls were moving. No, not moving, splitting open. Inside, wrapped in the metal and insulation, were bodies, dozens of them, all mummified, all looking just like me. Each one was a version of myself that had made the same journey, over and over, never escaping. You never left this highway. Frank, the hitchhiker said softly. None of us did. We're all just different versions of the same man, driving the same road, reliving the same guilt. Time doesn't work right here. It just keeps folding back on itself, like a snake eating its own tail. I stood up and ran back to my RV. But when I yanked open the door, I saw something that made me scream. Sitting in the driver's seat was another me, not just older, but decayed, like a corpse that had been left in the desert sun. It turned its head toward me, empty eye sockets staring straight into my soul. Want to know the really funny part? The hitchhiker asked, suddenly beside me again. In about 5 minutes, another version of you is going to pull up to this gas station. And you know what? He won't recognize himself either. Just like you didn't recognize me when you first picked me up, that's when I finally really looked at the hitchhiker's face, past the darkness in his eyes, past the gray skin, past the horrible smile. And I saw what I should have seen from the beginning. He was me. As I stood there staring at the hitchhiker, at myself. Bright lights suddenly lit up the street. 3 black cars pulled up, their headlights blinding me. Men in dark suits got out, carrying briefcases with government logos. Mr. Miller, one of them said, walking toward me. We've been expecting you. We're always expecting you. Every time. Who are you? I asked, my voice shaking. We're from Project Sidewinder. He said, we've been watching this stretch of road since the accident in '53. You see, when that truck crashed, it wasn't just carrying normal nuclear waste. It was carrying something special, something that broke time itself in this area. The man opened his briefcase and pulled out an old newspaper. The headline made my heart stop. 3 dead in highway crash. Local salesman Frank Miller among victims. But I survived. I whispered, I've been alive all these years. The man shook his head sadly. No, Mr. Miller, you died that day, just like the others. But your guilt, combined with what spilled on this road, it created something we've never seen before. A loop in time where you relive your last journey over and over, picking up versions of yourself as a hitchhiker, trying to force yourself to remember and accept what happened. I looked down at my hands. They were becoming transparent, like smoke in the wind. The hitchhiker, the other me, was getting clearer, more solid. It's time. Frank, he said, time for you to take my place. Time for me to move on. I understood now. Each version of me had to play both parts. The driver and the hitchhiker, one trying to run from the truth, the other forcing us to face it, round and round, until what? Until you truly accept what you did. The government man said, as if reading my thoughts, until you stop running from your guilt. Some versions of you have been on this road for what feels like centuries. Others find peace sooner. I watched as another RV pulled up to the gas station. Inside was another me, looking exactly like I had at the start of this night. He didn't see us, not yet, but soon. He would pick up a hitchhiker on a lonely stretch of road. My body felt lighter now, changing. My suit turned black. My skin grew pale. The other me, the hitchhiker who had been in my RV, smiled one last time and faded away like morning mist. I knew what I had to do. I started walking toward the highway, toward the spot where this all began, where it always begins. Behind me, I heard the government man say quietly, "See you next time, Mr. Miller." I kept walking. The desert stretched out before me, dark and endless. Somewhere ahead, I could hear the rumble of an RV engine. Soon, a familiar vehicle would appear. The driver would be tired, lonely, running from his past, and I would be waiting. After all, we all have to face ourselves eventually, even if it takes an eternity on the devil's highway.